At Dot and Company, we believe that all agencies deserve amazing account managers and that all of those account managers deserve to be supported, encouraged, and loved on. That's why we started CAM Community, a membership only for account managers. And inside, you'll gain access to the exact training we use to train our own client facing account managers, but also access to all of our SOPs, processes, and live trainings on a variety of topics. If you're an account manager, this is the place you've been waiting for. Learn more at dotandcompany.co/CAM community.
The thing is, it's never going to be easy, but fortunately, it doesn't have to be so hard. If you use resources to help you make things easier, you don't have to struggle.
Welcome to the Happy Clients Podcast, brought to you by Dot and Company. Whether you're a virtual assistant, an agency owner, or a client-facing account manager, we all deal with clients. Lucky for you, client management is what we do best. Now, let's dig in, chat cam life, and have some fun along the way. Cheers to happy clients.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're so excited. We've both read your book, Katie and I, and so we're excited to dig in, ask you some questions, not only about the book, but also about your experience. And I think our audience, agency owners, are going to learn so much. So welcome to the show.
Glad to be here and looking forward to helping everyone listening find ways to work less and earn more.
My favorite saying ever. So Karl, before we dig in, could you just give us like the Coles Notes version of your experience and how you landed in the crazy agency world?
I am today an agency consultant, coach, and trainer. I've worked directly with hundreds of agencies all over the world, every inhabited continent. I come from an agency operations background as an agency project manager and de facto account manager, director of client services, and director of operations. I had started way back in the mid to late 90s as a freelance web designer in high school, back in the days of dial-up. So I've been doing digital marketing for a long time, decided to combine that digital marketing experience, consulting experience, agency operations experience as the number two to the agency owners, put that all together and launch what's now Sakas and Company, where I do one-on-one support through coaching and consulting, training to groups of people from agencies, as well as some information products people can use on a do-it-yourself basis at sakasandcompany.com.
Carl, I love that background. It's really good to see, for our listeners to just understand where you came from, but you forgot author, which I think is a really important piece to all this too, because Karl has written a book. Karl, I love that background information. It's just really valuable for our listeners to understand sort of where you come from, how you're working today and who you're working with. But you did forget one of the most important pieces is that you're also an author of Work Less, Earn More. So maybe even kind of give us, I hate to be punny, but maybe give us the Coles Notes on how you created Work Less, Earn More.
Absolutely. So Work Less, Earn More is my third book. The first was on speaking for agency lead gen, how to get clients through public speaking. Second was on leading marketing and creative teams. And I noticed this challenge where a lot of agency owners start their agency because they had some goal in mind, and then reality gets in the way. And often they're miserable running the business, or at least they're just not having fun, even if they're not miserable. And in my work, I help clients change that, help them make things better, and ultimately turn that into a step-by-step process that I call Work Less, Earn More. It's about reducing your day-to-day involvement in the agency. And this helps whether you were looking to run a lifestyle agency, like running the business, you just want to stop doing the stuff you don't like doing, and of course, pay yourself well, and you're still growing the business. That's the lifestyle end, or the equity side of things, where your goal is to do an exit, to sell the agency in some way and move on to something new. So that's why I created Work Less, Earn More. And
And as a reader of the book, and you have certainly outlined sort of those different categories so well and really have spoken to the different sort of even stages of kind of where the agency owner falls,
Right.
and when kind of in the life journey of the agency. And I think that delegation is a huge part of this. And often agency owners who are delegating and are kind of moving their role, moving through the agency, when they're delegating, they can often maybe be seeking out new things to do or even become bored in their new roles. So, what are
Yeah.
some things that you've seen that successful agency owners, once they exit the day to day, what have you seen them sort of, I guess, thrive in and really sort of, I guess, what areas do they grow their business primarily? Maybe which have you seen?
The key there is to make sure you find what works for you. So, for instance, a client recently pulled back from serving as the day-to-day CEO of the agency that he had founded and has moved into a chair role. And one of the things that he's doing there is mentoring junior team members who, if he were still the CEO, probably wouldn't get that level of face time in terms of mentoring and helping them develop in their careers. That's something that he really enjoys. So he's made that part of his new roles. We've talked about defining what does he want to do. And of course, he has a team member, business partner, who is now the day-to-day head of the business. But it could be something else. For some people, it's writing a book. For other people, it's traveling. For some people, it's starting a new agency. I'd helped a client do an exit a number of years ago, and she worked at the new firm for a bit, and then after the end of the non-compete, started a new agency. So you can do whatever you want. And importantly, for everyone who's listening, you don't have to wait until you have a complete exit to start doing the things you want. You would raise the idea of the continuum. You could think of it as a fuel gauge. There are 4 stages, and optional is the last one, but there are others along the way. Stage 1 is your mandatory. You can never get away. You got to do everything. Stage 2 is your necessary. You're able to get away for a day or two, and maybe your team's handling things not always very well, but you can sort of get away. Stage 3 is where a lot of people want to get to. That would be making themselves needed, not necessary. You could go on vacation for a week. Things are going relatively smoothly, things like that. You're not going to disappear for the whole year and never talk to anyone, but things are pretty good. Stage 3 needed. And then if you want, you can pursue stage 4, which is making yourself optional, which importantly, you get to define what optional means for you.
I love that. And I think it's really important to identify as an agency owner. So obviously I'm thinking about myself, but as an agency owner, what does that mean to you? And I think most people, if we were sitting around a table of 10 different agency owners, what that looks like is different for every single one of us. And I think it's important, through reading your book, I just realized that it's okay to not be like everyone else. And it's okay to have a different opinion of what the exit looks like. And so let's kind of dig in. I know in your book, you talked about different agency owners being maybe a starter or a finisher. And I think this is really important to identify as an agency owner what you are, what type of person you are as you're thinking about maybe exiting or becoming not as needed anymore. Could you identify what that is and elaborate? That would be awesome.
As an agency consultant, I'm always looking for and noticing patterns. And when I see a particular pattern over and over again across multiple clients, then I'll dig into it a bit further and put a name to it. So starter versus finisher is one of those. And it came to me as I was speaking with a client who, as we were getting started in our coaching together, said that he had struggled to fulfill his company-wide initiatives the previous year. And as we dug into it a bit more, it seems like he had done some annual planning, had set some goals for Q1, and then never looked at them again. It's like, okay, that was definitely part of it. And as we explored a bit further, it became clear that he enjoyed starting things, whether that was coming up with a new idea to grow the agency, recruiting people, getting them excited about working for the agency, doing sales, getting potential clients excited to hire his firm. The problem was he didn't enjoy the follow through. And that's true for a lot of people. I mean, I think some people listening are like, yes, that's neat. And what I realized was he is what I would call a starter. He is great at starting things, great at getting people excited, but he needs someone following along behind him to take care of the details, to implement the plan, to turn those ideas into reality. And I would call that role a finisher. So you've got a starter and a finisher, and they need each other, right? A starter needs a finisher to get things done. And finishers, in my experience, and I've been in that role before as a director of operations, it's great for a finisher to turn that idea into reality. They may not necessarily love coming up with the new idea in the first place. They're definitely creative within their own area, but they're not necessarily trying to be the CEO of the agency. So starter versus finisher, most people are somewhere on that continuum, and do a bit of both. For instance, I was speaking with a client where they have three people in key roles. There's a CEO, a president who also serves as the COO, and then the COO has a head of operations reporting to him. And so in that case, the CEO might be 90 or 100% starter, right? Off making things happen. The COO might be, somewhere in between. And then in contrast, the operations manager, operations director might be 80% finisher, 20% starter, starting some things, but primarily executing on the vision that has flowed downward.
I love that you're also not bucketing 100% and 100%, right? I think that was a huge takeaway when I was reading that in your book as well, is that we almost were conditioned in previous sort of agency jargon, agency sort of trends to think you fall here or you fall here. It's a bit more fluid than maybe we originally thought. That was huge. That was a really big takeaway, because there's sometimes when you are a starter and sometimes when you're a finisher, right? I think you're right. It's not maybe 50-50, but how did you kind of come to that realization? And it's probably working with people, but you'll tell me, Karl, but how did you come to that realization that there is some fluidity between the two?
I think that's been a theme to almost all of my work. There are some people out there who have a very binary view. It's, you're either this or that, or, maybe there are three options or something like that. And from my own experience, like, life is complicated. It's not one thing or the other kind of thing. So it just makes sense that it's a continuum rather than, it's always either fully this or fully that. Maybe going to therapy has been helpful for that.
Yeah.
Not black and white thinking, there's nuance to it. There's nuance in everything we do. And speaking of therapy, some of my clients call me their agency therapist. To clarify, as I note, I am not an actual therapist. Hopefully everyone is seeing a therapist.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think it's important because, as we're thinking about this, I agree with Katie. We always kind of wanted to put ourselves in a bucket. Like, am I an integrator? Am I a visionary? Am I a CEO? Or maybe I'm a COO, or maybe I'm better at sales. But I think it's important, like the way you put it, is you can be multiple things, but maybe you do some better than others, or maybe this is where you really thrive in that 80%. So I love that distinction.
It's also context specific. For instance, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, if sales as a consultant and a head of a business, doing sales frequently, I wouldn't have been thrilled about that. But the sales work I'm doing is to sell my services, which I believe in, to people who need help. Where I think before that, I had the idea of sales being like you walk into Radio Shack and people descend on you, 100, fully commissioned salespeople or what have you, trying to push something you don't want. It's like, no, we're doing consultative sales. We're helping people solve difficult problems, not trying to sell them the latest, cordless phone.
I totally agree with that. And I think that is just this overarching theme sometimes in agencies, like you having this passion, you agency owners having this passion for their business and kind of wanting to see that evolution and wanting to see that growth. And then really seeing where the strengths are in you and maybe your team as well, right?
For sure.
So I think that is a burning question in a lot of agency owners, especially the ones that we're speaking with here at Dot & Company, is kind of that next step, right? Growing your team. So I think, the common question is when's the right time? But we always say there's never a right time, right? So when it comes to different parts of your team, if you don't have a team, you don't have an agency. Is that a direct quote?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the team specifically. What's sort of your secret sauce when it comes to hiring account management, project management? And I do have the graphic in my head. I can see it right
Yeah.
now, which I've actually screenshotted and put on my computer because it is, again, maybe there's some fluidity to it. But when it comes to hiring AM and PM, what are the challenges, junior versus senior, kind of those things when you're hiring?
There are a number of things. And for people who are listening, the graphic is that I've identified 6 agency roles. The snapshot is that every agency role fits into one of these categories. People can be in more than one role at once, although that can create some challenges. But the roles are account management, AM, project management, PM, your subject matter experts, SMEs. Those would be your designers, developers, writers, analysts, that kind of thing. Client strategist, which is sort of a super SME blended with an account manager, but they have a different goal. Their job is to maximize the client's ROI on their budget. You've got biz dev, which is your marketing, sales, and partnerships. And then finally, support, which is operations and leadership. So if we look specifically at AM and PM and finding the right people, what a lot of agencies will do is they try to combine the role. And that's totally normal. Someone is maybe an account manager who also does project management, or this was my experience. I was a project manager who was also doing account management. And it's a challenge. Obviously, I'm sure you have your version of this in your work, but I would describe account management as keep the clients happy and usually sell them more work. The account manager is the voice of the client within the agency, making sure that whatever the agency is doing is aligned to what the client needs. Project management is more about getting the work done smoothly, efficiently, profitably. It's more about what has been sold. Let's deliver it. Let's fulfill our commitments. And the challenge becomes when you have someone who leans more toward project management, you're asking them to think about upsells, for instance. It's hard to think about upsells when you're focused on, did we deliver what we've already committed to, right? It's a different mindset. And then the same thing, if you have someone who leans maybe more toward account management and you're expecting them to do deep project management, the AM is thinking, oh, client mentioned they're doing this new thing. Let's do it, without necessarily going through what are the project management implications? Do we have additional budget? Things like that. So in an ideal world, you could separate the roles. You have a dedicated AM, dedicated project manager. The key thing is when you're hiring, if you could only hire one role, make sure you're clear on which is the primary role you need. Is it an AM who can do PM or a PM who can do AM? Because otherwise you're going to be frustrated.
That's so true. That is gold. Katie and I are like, yes. So obviously you've done a lot of hiring. So have you hired maybe the junior person out of college versus the very seasoned account PM? Like, where do you see the difference and what do you recommend to your clients?
In general, when you're hiring, you are in part paying for their having made certain early career mistakes somewhere else. Because if they haven't made the mistake yet, they're probably going to make it working for your agency. And when you're hiring an entry-level team member, if you have a great program to provide training and coaching to help them up level, that's fine, right? If you've got that support structure. If your agency doesn't have that support structure to train and really onboard and coach junior hires, that's probably not the direction to go. You need more mid-career people or potentially senior hires if you don't have the time to do it. Occasionally people will ask me, should I hire a junior person for this role? They're so much cheaper. It's like, yes, there's a reason though. Are you ready as the agency owner or executive? Are you ready to spend 10 hours a week training and coaching them and reviewing and overseeing their work? The answer is yes. Hey, go for it. It's like, well, no, I was hoping it would take, a couple hours a week. Probably shouldn't hire an entry-level person in that case. And that's part of my advice when, I do guest lectures for business college students. If they're looking at entry level roles, what kind of support is the company providing to them? Otherwise, you're thrown into the deep end, and that tends not to go well for anyone.
I think that is definitely valuable. I think the trendy word is Easter eggs, or maybe so many golden nuggets in there for sure. And just to kind of go further with that, Karl, when you are thinking about even your role inside of the agency, let alone the next, right? Your role, when is a good time for agency owners to kind of not only think about their role, but like what does that role look like when they're ready to sort of look at the next role, look at growing their team?
So ideally doing a review at least once a year about where the agency owner is and where they want to be. I call that writing an advanced retrospective, where you write about the future as if it's already happened, and then you can work backwards to get there. So you could write, talk in the book about a 5-year advanced retrospective, write about as if it's a day, 5 years from now, what's happening, who are the people you're meeting with, what are the things you're making decisions about, just what all is happening. And you can work backwards to get there. And then once you have a longer term vision, you can do an annual one. Now, that can help surface things, right? If your ideal future vision involves either doing things you're not doing now or not doing things that you are doing now, you're going to need to get help. Now, that could be, for instance, pulling in additional existing team members to help with some of the things you don't want to do. They may or may not have bandwidth, or it could be hiring new people. It could also be stop doing it altogether. And in the book, I talk about the 4 Ds: do, drop, delegate, defer. Do is if, you're the one to do it, you need to do it. Okay. Drop is you just decide you're not going to do it altogether. Make sure you tell other people that you're not going to do it. Delegate is to enlist someone else to handle it. That includes showing them what needs to happen and being clear about expectations rather than just abdicating, just dumping it on them. And then sometimes it's defer. Maybe you're still the right one to do it, just not right now. So do, drop, delegate, defer. That can be a good way to look at it. But to your point about when to recognize it, ideally you're doing an annual review about how things are going. Sometimes for some people, it's having a life event. Could be a health scare. It could be if they have kids, maybe their kids are approaching a milestone date, like graduating from high school, or something like that, or maybe finishing college tuition. In a CMO networking group that I used to run through a marketing association, one of the CMOs mentioned that she was celebrating that she and her husband had been paying tuition for 14 years straight. And finally, coming up in the next year, that was it. And I said, I imagine you'll be going to Bali or something like that. Unfortunately, that next year was 2020. So don't think they did the big trip. But, as for everyone listening, as you're thinking, do you have any major life events coming up? For some people, it's turning 40, it's turning 50, it's kids' graduation, it's something else. Pay attention to how you're feeling. If you dread going to work every Monday morning, pay attention to that.
I love that.
I love that too. And I think not to interrupt here, Taylor, but I think there's so much value in that personal sort of aspect of it too, because sometimes we are thinking about the business 24/7. Sure, I'll work on Saturday. Sure, I'll work on Sunday. But like when I have children, so maybe it lands differently, but children are not like those are that's time for yourself. And weekend
Yep.
over weekend, it adds up. So I love that here at Dot and Company, we're big on the gut feel too, but that sort of gut intuition, because it does really sort of um, have a positive guide sometimes, which is really cool. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Karl, because kind of checking off the boxes and doing all those things looks great, but you want to also sort of listen to those life events and what's happening. And then set yourself up for success, right? So I think the 4 Ds are great. Again, in my notes here, they're really great to sort of live by. And I think kind of once you're able to go outside of that agency owner, like one man, one person show, I think it really does sort of alleviate some of the, hopefully, some of the stress, does allow you more time for whatever that might be. So really valuable as well.
So, Karl, I just wanted to dig into one last thing since we are obsessed with client management here.
Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned in the book was account managers are there to protect the subject matter experts from client interruptions, which we are all about. But can you elaborate on your thoughts around this topic?
Yes. So as agencies grow, they tend to divide up those 6 roles. So instead of someone being an account manager who is also the client strategist, or a project manager who is also a developer, or things like that, you start segmenting the roles and dividing them out a bit more. Of course, sometimes people are like, well, I can't afford to have, an account manager and a strategist, separate people on the client call. It's like, well, you may not be charging enough if you can't afford to have both of them on the call. But as you sort through that, part of my job at one of the agencies as a PM, who was often wearing an AM hat as well, was we had strategists, we had other subject matter experts, and clients loved talking to them. Our lead developer was a huge people person. Sometimes I'd have to actually pull them back. I'm like, okay, it's time to, we've had a good conversation. Now let's move forward. Or one of the strategists. So for instance, we had a client who loved talking to his assigned strategist. She was not as thrilled about speaking with him. And so part of my job was to take the incoming call and schedule things with her, or to coordinate there rather than him going to her directly. And part of that was we had to do some training, which was the fastest way for him to get a response would be to go through the project management system or by calling me. And he loved calling. That particular client was the kind of person where if he didn't answer the phone, like if I was in a meeting, I would hear him calling around to all of the extensions in the office. And one day he called, he had a question for a strategist. She was out that day. She's not available. She actually was out that day. But I said, she's out. But that's actually something I've worked on before. I can walk you through what to do. And I walked him through it as the project manager. And at the end of the call, he was like, oh, okay, that was really helpful. I'm surprised you knew how to do that, which I thought, that was funny. He was in a somewhat dysfunctional situation at his company. And I mean, part of being an account manager is letting people talk, right? Sometimes clients may not have anyone else they can talk to, and they just need to talk. I had one client years ago as a director of client services. My day-to-day contact was great. Her boss, though, was kind of terrible. And I was on the phone with the day-to-day contact once, and I made a joke about something. She laughed and she said, thanks, I needed that. We don't laugh much here.
Oh,
Yeah.
so sad.
So
That's heartbreaking.
account managers do end up sometimes playing the unlicensed therapist. Keep in mind, though, that from a boundaries perspective, there is only so much you can do to help, right? If someone is struggling with a range of issues in their personal life, or kind of core issues in their work that just aren't going to go away, there's only so much you can do to help. And so some of that gets into, when do you set boundaries accordingly? And that's what makes account management hard, and why not everyone is going to succeed in that role, right? If someone is an account manager, they need to have the tools to do it. If you think about my desire, competence, capacity Venn diagram, they need the competence to do it. They need the capacity, they need time to do it. They also need the desire to do it. And so if you're expecting your existing team members who might be more of a subject matter expert to become a de facto account manager, make sure they want to do it. Because if they don't, it's not going to go smoothly.
Gold. I love that.
Would love to know, this is just because I love hearing this sort of, I feel like it's my reality TV via podcast. But like, what is your best success story? When did you sort of really implement all the steps? The agency did all the things and they came out on top maybe we could hear a little bit more about that.
One of the clients that I talk about as a case study in the Work Less, Earn More book is Mike King of iPullRank. So Mike is really amazing SEO expert, right? He's been doing it for a long time, is really good at it. And one of the things that he had mentioned to me, and I talk about this in the extended case study, is he wanted to get back to releasing an album. So in college, he had toured as a hip hop artist, had been performing, had albums back then, but work got in the way, right? So he wanted to do a new album for about a decade, and it just hadn't happened. So in our coaching, I dug into things. Now, as an agency coach, I am not an expert on releasing an album, but having been a project manager, I could think through, okay, this is a project, we want to solve it. What's the work back situation? What are the bottlenecks? Things like that. And what I realized was the key to help him get unstuck was for him to book a week of studio time. If he had the studio time booked, well, he can start recording, but also that meant he had to do some prep, right? To turn it into a deadline, and if he hadn't done all the prep, he could use some of the studio time to work on that. That ultimately was the key to getting things unlocked, and he released the album. So,
Such a win.
Yeah.
Such a win.
All your work selves, right?
Exactly. And I think we're probably all guilty of this. We see something, the sort of goal, but it gets bumped down, especially Monday through Friday, right?
Yep.
Weekends are busy, but it does get bumped down. So I love that. I love your turning it into a deadline. That's a huge takeaway for me. Just turning it into a deadline. Yeah, you have to go to the studio. That's how it's going to happen. Amazing. Karl, this has been literally between the book, me trolling your site, as I said, learning more about you and kind of your agency and what you've been doing. It's been so helpful. Is there anything that you love to leave, thing you kind of want to say? Of course, we're going to link all of your information below, the book, your website, but is there anything you want to tell sort of agency owners that might be sort of just on the cusp of looking to explode?
So certainly checking out the Work Less, Earn More book. It's Work Less, Earn More, How to Escape the Daily Grind of Agency Ownership. It's available on Amazon worldwide in Kindle, paperback, and hardcover. If you go to worklessearnmorebook.com, it'll give you the links to buy it. Also, you can get a free chapter, and you can even get the free workbook that goes with the book, 40 plus pages to help you turn ideas into reality. So certainly I'd recommend that people check that out, worklessearnmorebook.com. But, in terms of parting thoughts, running an agency is tough. I think the question that people don't ask me, rarely, it comes up rarely, is should they be running an agency? It's a really hard business to do. But if you're passionate about it, if you're passionate about doing really interesting marketing, creative, technical work, building a team, building a business, it can be a great match. The thing is, it's never going to be easy, but fortunately, it doesn't have to be so hard. If you use resources to help you make things easier, you don't have to struggle. So good luck to everyone out there.
I love it. Karl, this has been awesome. We also echo that you should go get the book. It's awesome. We are running an agency here. We read it, and all of it is very, very relevant. Karl, where can people find you and learn more about maybe the services that you offer and kind of just check you out a little bit further?
If you'd like to hear more about my one-on-one and group training and on-demand services, as well as at this point, over 400 free articles about agency management, you can go to sakasandcompany.com. That's SAKAS, the word company.com. And be sure to sign up for the newsletter, what more than one agency owner has called the only email they read every time they get it.
Ooh, definitely going to be opting into that because I've been unsubscribing from everything this week. So I'm looking for some really good nuggets in my inbox. So I'm excited about that. Karl, thank you so, so much for coming on. We can't wait for everyone to take a listen, and we will catch you all on the next episode.
Thanks, Karl.
Thank you.
Cheers to happy clients.